He hasn't come back yet, and guess what? We still got work to do. Right? So, I told you a little earlier, I'm beginning a new series. You know what we're going to do the first part of the year? We're going to build some walls. Now, I'm not saying we're going to build we're going to have a new building campaign or anything. It's not. These are the walls I'm talking about are not physical walls. But the walls I'm talking about are going to be walls in our lives that maybe we have neglected in our lives. Areas of our lives that we have let go, that we have just neglected. We haven't done them very much, and the walls around those areas have fallen down. And I know that sometimes when we say we're going to build walls in our lives, it's not really a good thing, because people always say, I'm going to build a wall around something that happened in my life, and I'm not going to let anybody come in and try taking over that part of my life. Well, I'm not talking about those walls. Those walls should come down, but I want to help you build some walls around different areas in your life. And the person that we're going to look to help us build those walls, because it's really the walls I'm going to talk about in this person, in this biblical book. It shows you what happens when you and I begin to look at our lives and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take on this project. What all happens when you and I say, yes, I'm going to do this? So the person that we're going to look at, or the book of the Bible we're going to look at, falls in a triad of books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So if you want to find the book of Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, you will find that three books put together there right after the book of 2 Chronicles. So what I'm going to do is this today. I'm going to give you like an introductory message. And then I'm going to give you an assignment. And then we can't do this on our own. Okay? What I'm going to tell you about, and what we're going to spend some time talking about, is in the building of the walls of our lives, and I'll explain them to you. What I'm talking about is this, like the wall around our prayer life. Maybe we have neglected a prayer life, or maybe you aren't reading the Bible as much as you would like to. Something has crept in, and we used to read the Bible a lot, but now something has crept in, and we don't read it quite as much as we used to. Okay? Or, maybe there are some relationships in our lives, in the church and out of the church, that have kind of fallen into disrepair, and now God wants to build them and strengthen the walls around those relationships that He wants us to deal with. Those are the kind of walls that I want to talk about. And what I want to do is, then I'm going to give you an assignment, and the fact that we can't do this on our own. So what we're going to end our service with is with communion, but it's going to be one where I will open it up, and you will come forward, and you will take the elements and make it a time between you and God, and saying, help me in my assignment to look at my life and see what I have to build. And God, help me to build the way you would have me build. So we're going to begin with Nehemiah chapter 1. I'm going to read to you the first 4 verses, and then we're going to go to some other passages as we go through like an introductory message this morning. But Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 1 begins, the words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month Chislev, in the 20th year, while I was in Susa the capital, that Hananiah, one of my brothers, and some men from Judah came, and I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped and had survived the captivity, and about Jerusalem. And he said to me, the remnant in the province who survived the captivity are in great distress and reproach, and the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are burned with fire. When I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. Now you're going to ask yourself, why would anybody fast and cry and pray about some broken walls in a land far away by a man who's never seen Jerusalem? Nehemiah has never seen Jerusalem. He's a man, and I'll tell you about a little while, he was a man that was born in captivity, or he may have gone into captivity when he was a very young man. He's never seen Jerusalem. And now he wants to know about his city, because it always said, in a Jewish person's heart, Jerusalem is always home. And so here in this man's life, he's beginning to wonder what's going on in Jerusalem. And I'll tell you the story as to how he got there. But I want you to understand, he says it's in the 20th year of captivity. Israel or Judah has been sent away by God into captivity for 70 years. And we'll get to that in just a little while. So now he's in the 20th year of their captivity. And his heart is broken for the walls of Jerusalem. So now, let me take you back to tell you where it all began, all right? Way back, beginning in 1 Samuel. You see, Israel was never supposed to have a king. In fact, when Israel became a nation, God's idea was for them to be ruled over by judges who were so in tune with God that these judges would rule over the entire nation of Israel, who would hear from God, and God would tell them what to do and how to live. In fact, if you want to use like a certain word, God wanted Israel to be run like a theocracy, run by God. Okay? Well, they had a number of judges. So when you read the book of Judges, they weren't too good at judges. And by the time you reach 1 Samuel, the last three judges in those books, they aren't too good at judges anymore. They're kind of corrupt. Their kids are corrupt. The last judge is Samuel, and he starts out good, but his boys, they aren't too good either. They're kind of corrupt. And so Israel, seeing all that's going on around them, looks at these other nations and says, you know what? We want to be like them. We want a king. We want a king that we can see, who can tell us what to do, and we can see the king personally, and he can tell us how to live. So they go to Samuel, the elders of Israel go to Samuel, and they say, we want a king. He says, you don't want a king. And they said, yes, we want a king. And there's some argument back and forth. And finally, God tells Samuel, okay, give them what they want, give them a king. But tell them what the king is going to do to them. And so Samuel tells them all about it, but they insist they want a king. Now, Israel really has three good kings. They start out really good. Their three famous kings are Saul, David, and Solomon. Those are the kings you always read about and you'll always remember. Yet they weren't too good at kings either. So if in your notes you can write down Saul, David, and Solomon, and I'm going to give you like a one-sentence description of their life behind each person. Saul, I would call Saul a very jealous, insecure king. Started out good, became very insecure, very jealous, and God withdrew from him, and he just got worse. Then along comes David. David is really a military king. He expands the region of Israel bigger than anybody else. But David really had a problem. He kind of liked women. And so, whenever I read the Bible, and I know it's always there, and when I get to like 2 Samuel chapter 11, I'm hoping that somehow that chapter changes in the Bible somehow. But when you read 2 Samuel chapter 11, that's when everything changes in David's life. He sees a woman, gets her pregnant. He calls her husband home from the war, gives him his death sentence, runs him back to the war. He gets killed. Everything is fine. It's not fine. They come back, and the rest of David's life is not good. And then you think to yourself, yet the description of David is this: a man after God's own heart. How can that be? Then you have Solomon. Solomon, I would call Solomon an extravagant king. Do you know that he's the only king that God offered him the 3 wishes? He said, here are 3 wishes, now choose one. And he chose wisdom. But he got a lot of, he made Israel very wealthy. The Bible says that in his reign, that gold was, or silver was like, who wants silver? It was like nothing to him. In fact, I think if Solomon was living today, his motto would be, go big or go home. In fact, that even carried over into his life. You know how many wives he had? Like 700. And 300 concubines. Can you imagine that many mother-in-laws wondering how you were treating his wife, his daughter? Can you imagine that? But the problem with Solomon was he allowed every religion to come into Israel. Every religion. Idolatry, come on in. It got so bad that God came to Solomon and said, because you have let this in, he said this here: I will rip the kingdom from your hands. Not in your lifetime. But what's going to happen is the kingdom is going to be ripped from your hands. And it won't be the same. So Solomon dies. His son is named Rehoboam. Now that's not in your notes. Rehoboam now becomes king. Rehoboam has a choice. The people come to Rehoboam and say, can you please lower taxes? Can you please lower the taxes on the people? We've paid dearly through your dad. Can you please lower the taxes? So he is faced with the choice. The older men say, yes, I think we ought to lower the taxes. The younger guys say, no, I think we ought to raise the taxes higher. And so Rehoboam says, I think I'll go with the young guys and we'll raise taxes higher. And what happens is a split comes. Now, how many tribes are in Israel? We always talk about in the Bible, how many tribes are there in Israel? 12 tribes. Okay? When Rehoboam happens, the tribes are all split. A split happens, a civil war happens, and they're all split. 10 tribes move north. Okay? They become Israel. 2 tribes stay in the south. Judah and Benjamin stay in the south. They become Jews. Okay? The 10 tribes go north, and after a series of not good kings, in fact, I'd say 90%, if not more, of the kings of Israel in the north were pretty bad kings. Toward the end, God sends prophets, God sends warnings, God sends all kinds of people to tell them, straighten up, or you're going to go into slavery. They don't listen. They keep on until finally, centuries later, after a bunch of bad kings, A country called Syria takes them into captivity, and they're just gone. So how many tribes are left? 2. You would think that they would learn from their sister, but they didn't. Judah and Benjamin, they had some pretty good kings and some bad ones. And they're warned. They're warned by prophets and as well. Now, but they don't listen. And pretty soon, after all the warnings and all that happens, a country called Babylon comes in, and by a king. Have you ever heard of the king named Nebuchadnezzar? That name sound familiar to you? He comes in and he takes Judah and Benjamin captive for 70 years. Now here's a little reason why it's 70 years. Because here's why. I hope I get my figures right. Every 7th year, by the law, the land had to lay settled for 1 year. Like all debts were to be forgiven, the land had to lay, what's that word, like fallow? For like 1 year. They couldn't work the land, it had to rest. But since that law was given, it had never happened. So God said this, you won't let the land rest, I'll make the land rest. So he hauls Babylon, he hauls Judah into captivity. Now, I'm going to have you turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 36. Well, here's what's interesting, and I'm going to get to 36. 36, yeah. Second Chronicles 36, yeah. What did I say? Oh, no. Chronicles. We're in the Old Testament now. 2 Chronicles 36. I'm just going to read through these verses. And then I'm going to, there's part of this that I'm going to come back to, but beginning with chapter 36, beginning with verse 11. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did evil in the sight of the Lord his God. He did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke for the Lord. And he rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who made him swear allegiance by God. But he stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord, the God of Israel. Furthermore, all the officials of the priests and the people were very unfaithful, following all the abominations of the nations, and they defiled the house of the Lord, which he had sanctified in Jerusalem. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they continually mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on the young men or virgin, old men or infirm, and he gave them into his hand. All the articles. These verses here is kind of an interesting one. All the articles of the house of God, great and small, and all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his officials, he brought them all to Babylon. Let me just stop there. How many of you in the book of Daniel, if you ever read that book, do you remember the story where one of the kings is having this great supper, and they go into the treasury and they bring out all these cups and saucers, and they began drinking of them, because all these articles that were cups were taken from the temple of God, and they said, let's just drink from them. And while they're having their supper and while they're eating, all at once this hand appears on the wall and starts writing on the wall, saying, you've been weighed in the balance and you found wanting. And that night, out the doors of their kingdom, which was in Babylon, there was another kingdom that's going to take over Babylon here just like the next day, and they were all in trouble. They were drinking from these articles. They were drinking from these things that had been sent. They were gods, and you don't mess with God's stuff, okay? So that's a story, and I'm going to come back to that here in just a little while. Now, if you're into highlighting this next verse, they took all these things back to Babylon, and they burned the house, and then they burned the house of God. They broke down the walls of Jerusalem, and they burned all its fortified buildings, with fire, and they destroyed all its valuable articles. That means this: when Babylon took over, they broke down the temple and they stripped everything, because they wanted all the gold, even all, like if they had a brick structure, like we put mortar between our bricks, they put gold. So they took apart brick by brick because they wanted all the gold from all the bricks. So they tore everything down to get as much gold out of that temple as possible, and they just burned everything that was left over. Those who had escaped from the sword he carried away into Babylon, and they were servants to him and to his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia. Now, Persia. I told to you that while they're eating and drinking out of God's stuff, Persia, there's a kingdom called the Medes and the Persians. They took over Babylon. They defeated Babylon and took over. Okay? Eventually, the Medes were taken over by the Persians. Do we know who the Persians were and are today? Iran, you're right. Up until like 1940, somewhere between 1940 or 35 and 40, they were always known as Persia. Now they're known as Iran. That's where this whole Judah and Israel, or Judah and Benjamin, were taken to. It's in Babylon. And do you know that during the war in Iraq, our government money went to build a town called Babylon? And they got it built ready for them. It's going to come back somewhere in the history of the Bible. In the last days, you read Revelation, that town or country is going to come back, and we built it. It's interesting. See that, and when it says that they took these people back to Babylon with them, here's some names that you know that were taken captive with those men in this captivity. I'm going to give you 4 names. You know them: Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're all part of this. So the books Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Daniel, they're all in the same time period. Okay? Now, but I want you to remember, the walls are burned with fire. Oh no, the walls are broken down and the gates are burned with fire. 22 and 23. Now, there's a new king in place. His name is Cyrus. Not Billy Ray Cyrus, just Cyrus. God puts it on his heart to send as many people as they want to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild it. Ezra is the story of a group of people who go back to Jerusalem to build the temple. But they go back to build the temple, and they find all kinds of problems, because you know what? Whenever you and I begin to say, yes, I will build my life for the Lord, there will always be trouble. There will always be there will always be someone who will stand against you and say, this is not going to happen. And Ezra is a story of them trying to build a temple among all kinds of discontent and trouble. And it takes like 18 years, and they haven't got it done yet. Nehemiah is the story of going back and building the walls around Jerusalem. And it's a story of victory. It's a story of conflict. But it's a story of what God can do in our lives if we just allow Him to work in our lives and building up those areas that He wants us to build up. I want to read to you one verse, and then you don't got to turn to it if you don't want to. And then I'm going to give you, it's Isaiah chapter 49. 15 and 16, it says this. Can a woman forget her nursing child and have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, but I will not forget you. Behold, I have inscribed you on the palms of my hand. Your walls are continually before me. Can you imagine that verse? That our lives are inscribed on the hands of God? And He says, your walls are always before me. God is saying, the walls of your life, what we're going to talk about, are always before Him. He's always watching us. We sang this morning about how great He is. I mean, He made everything, and yet He's concerned about the walls of our lives. He's concerned about your prayer life. He's concerned about your Bible reading. He's concerned about whatever He brings to your mind the next couple of weeks. It's always before Him, and He wants to help us through. Now, here's the lesson I want you to write down. The walls of our lives, what the walls were to Jerusalem, our lives are like before God. He saw Jerusalem. Jerusalem is His favorite place. What He saw, those walls, they were always before Him. The walls of our lives are always before Him. Now, I'm going to bring this to a close, and then we're going to have communion. But I'm going to give you an assignment. The assignment's going to come in 3 words. And I said before, we can't do this on our own. But your assignment is, in the next couple of weeks, a week or so, is to get before God. And number 1, here's the first word, evaluate your life. Evaluate your walk with the Lord. Ask Him this question. What areas of my life have fallen into disrepair? And understand this. Disrepair doesn't happen overnight. You know? I don't think you don't just wake up one morning and everything is falling apart. It's over time. Evaluate your life. Find out, then you got to look at what's the reconstruction. We're going to need guidance in reconstruction. We're going to need guidance in reconstruction. Ask the Lord, how do I reconstruct this? How do I reconstruct the areas? Here's the third one. Perseverance. Because you know what? They didn't fall into disrepair overnight, and they won't be fixed overnight. It's going to take time. I think it was Jim the other day talked about people falling into debt. You don't go into debt like overnight, but people want to be out of debt by tomorrow morning. You know. And what do you think about credit cards? If it takes you a year to get into debt, it takes you like 5 years to get out or something like that. It's just like, it takes time. But you have to want to. You have to want to understand the Bible. You have to want to pray. You have to want to build these things. And you know what? In this study, we're going to find Nehemiah didn't have it easy. There were all kinds of people against him. But guess what? In the end, he won. The great leader. There's going to be some great lessons. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray. And then, as I want you to understand this. And I don't want this is like an individual communion. And you're going to come here and take the elements, and you can stay right here and take them, or go someplace else. Because I want you to say this, and this is your prayer for today. God, as I evaluate my life, as I think about the reconstruction, give me perseverance, and will you walk through me the rebuilding of these areas of my life until my Jerusalem is safe. So Heavenly Father,